Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I know this isn't going out live tonight, but we're in the studio actually at the right time of day. And I'm joined tonight by Omar Antar, who is the founder of the Connecticut Palestine Alliance. And we're going to talk about a lot of updates and ways that people can get involved. So welcome and thank you for coming down to Southeast Connecticut.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Southeast Connecticut is a bit of my home as well because I'm formerly out of Plainfield or Moosup, Connecticut. And yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, I could start with a little bit about Connecticut Palestine Alliance.
Sure.
And so we're newly formed January of this year, 2024. And so, you know, we our goal is to, our kind of like our bread and butter is to interact with elected officials as well as the public and the media to both inform as well as to push you know, the public sphere towards, you know, peace and justice in Palestine. Obviously, it was you know, precipitated by the events of October 7th, and we've had some good progress, and in that we were able to you know, interact with different Connecticut state legislators, named senators and representatives, and we were able to you know, help write and push along a ceasefire letter with the Connecticut General Assembly. It was spearheaded by Miriam Khan. She's out of Windsor, and she's a Muslim sister that we're very, very happy to work with. And in the end, we got 4 Connecticut state senators and 14 Connecticut state representatives to co-sign the ceasefire letter. And it was directed to President Biden and the 2 senators, Senator Murphy and Blumenthal, to obviously advocate for immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, which is kind of like the top priority of the pro-Palestine movement in the United States generally. And but we do have longer-term goals, of which includes obviously divestment. And we're very happy to have a lot of different individuals and groups working with us and endorsing us. One of which is a former labor lawyer, and he actually has a long history in the state of Connecticut. Actually, back in 1981, when he was actually a union movement and a labor worker, he actually led the movement for divestment from the apartheid state of South Africa in 1981, and that was his work within the state of Connecticut. And so we're learning a lot from him, and he and his group were able to even get passage of a divestment in the Connecticut State Senate and House, but it wasn't signed by the governor. It didn't become law, but in effect, it did become its desired effect did become to fruition because the governor at that time, he was William O'Neill in 1981. He put together a task force that would to look at the issue of divestment, and in the end, they actually did divest from the apartheid state of South Africa. So they were very successful, and that's when we're modeling our work of divestment from the apartheid state of Israel today based on his work. And so we're very happy to try to bring that tradition along, and we're doing many different efforts. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop there.
I think one of the things that is a little bit unique about this particular situation, this genocide that's happening in Gaza, is that the United States is very actively financing it and enabling it. I mean, I know even today I saw someone say, well, we didn't hear you complain about, when people were starving in Darfur. And the answer is, that's terrible, but this time we're literally the people who are making it possible. So divestment is huge.
Yes, yes, yeah. The intricacy, how intertwined the United States and Israel is quite. It's quite unique, actually, even in history. People, like historians, have marveled at how intertwined the two countries are, and especially since post 1967. Because actually, prior to 1967, actually Israel had a very socialist bent, and a lot of Eastern European and communist countries actually supported Israel to a large degree. But post 67, it seems, and especially in the 70s, Israel had a more right-wing bent that's kind of reaching its peak now. It's super right-wing as we especially given the people who are in the government as we speak, they're openly racist and so supremacist and are calling for openly genocide. And even the biggest issue, at least in my view, is the starvation and the dehydration and the resulting disease that can kill more people than the bombing eventually if it maintains itself, because but there was commentary from these right-wing ex-government officials in the Israeli press that kind of mapped out this genocidal idea, and that to use starvation as a tool of war. And to me, it's kind of like a form of biological warfare, which can be extremely devastating.
And people who live in Connecticut, our temperate climate, don't really think much about it, but we're getting to the point of the year that it's not going to rain again till October. If you think about the climate, the Mediterranean
Gaza,
climate. And so, it's really important to stop the bombing and to stop the shooting, but we also need to start getting aid into there. And so far, aid has been, humanitarian aid has even been weaponized.
Yeah, yes, as we saw from the recent, World Central Kitchen murders, the 7 aid workers, and so there was even in Congress there was even a pushback by Representative Pocan and his letter that was signed by notables such as Nancy Pelosi and also one Connecticut Representative Johanna Hayes, but to a degree it's actually a little bittersweet that those expressions of objection to those murders, because where was the objection to the 200 plus people, aid workers who were killed prior to those murders? And it kind of seems as a double standard. If it's white and European and Australians who get killed, then you can ask for this accountability and stopping of weapons until there's accountability. But prior to that, nothing. And
It is really disturbing, but one of the other things that the U.S. has done has stopped funding UNRWA, so it really is interfering with the kind of humanitarian aid coming in that should be happening.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. The Congress also voted to defund UNRWA until 2025, and. But there was some pushback from the progressive and even a little bit less progressive, members of the House, such as DeLauro.
And I think I heard that Joe Courtney might have signed on to that as well.
Yes. Yeah, Joe Courtney was part of a larger letter that actually was addressed to DeLauro. So DeLauro wouldn't sign that letter, but DeLauro in other ways expressed support for maintaining funding for UNRWA, which is good, but it also doesn't address the problem of why there is such a need for UNRWA, namely, and especially acutely now in all the bombing and the siege of Gaza. And so, yeah, so while that is appreciated, ultimately their efforts, obviously failed in terms of the final vote for Congress, which then pushes the need for other sources of funds for UNRWA, are crucial, internationally. And but of course, the motivation to defund UNRWA is kind of pretty, nefarious, and that people have actually even recently kind of looked into the accusations of the Israelis that Hamas members were part of UNRWA. And they found, there was an Al Jazeera, video about this, that there's actually no evidence, and then even at the time of the accusation, the evidence that some journalists received was just a list of names, and that's it. There was like no actual real proof, and and so it's quite outrageous that you can defund and potentially starve millions, just on hearsay or just accusation.
And I get frustrated because I'm part of the Jewish community, and I feel as though when I look at Gaza and I think, like, what analogies do I have from history? And I think, well, the Warsaw Ghetto is sort of the closest I can see, and the fact that not just right-wing Israelis, but a lot of Jewish Americans who are mainstream kind of buy into the fact that, oh yeah, that's okay. Well, like, we kind of already know it's not okay. After October 7th, when the Israelis first went into Gaza, the first victims were not military targets. They were the most helpless people they could find.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, that's sort of what differentiates a military action from like a genocide where you're trying to destroy a whole civilization. Is who are the first people you're going after? Are they the people in power, the people with the weapons, or is it the helpless people in hospitals?
Yes.
Women, children.
Yes. It was very clear that that the bombing, was indiscriminate, and that it is very clear to us, despite the media impression to otherwise, that the objective wasn't really military. That they really weren't really targeting, Hamas militants, and since the early stages of the bombing, it's revealed that there's even the use of artificial intelligence, or AI, a program called Lavender, and under those programs of targeting of Gaza, they even had pretty nefarious terms for like something to the effect of "Where's Daddy" or something like that, where they actually tried to deliberately bomb while the theoretical target is at its home with his family, and so it's people have described it as blatant murder, and so and it seems very clear that given the systematic bombing of the structures of Gaza, that the objective really wasn't to kill and eliminate Hamas, but to eventually make the Gaza uninhabitable, so that eventually they'll leave voluntarily, and basically have a place for settlers, or reclaiming Gaza for the state of Israel.
Yeah, and the result is a lot of whole families were destroyed. I went to the rally in New Britain at CCSU a couple weeks ago, and it was done very well, but and put together by some Palestinian American students, and at the end they said they were doing a memorial to the martyrs, and I thought, what to expect, but some of these young women who were in school in Connecticut lost 50, 60, 70, 80 family members in targeted raids on family compounds. And when they named the relatives who were dead, they ranged in age from elderly people in their 80s to infants who were less than a year old.
Yes. There are a good number of Palestinian Americans in the state of Connecticut, and I even get videos of the destruction of the homes of the relatives of the people we know here, and of course, and their family members they do report to us have been killed, and so there is actually an organization, a Muslim organization that's trying to have basically a convenient way for people to submit information about actual certifiable places and times in which people have been killed, and they could submit that information so that eventually, hopefully, it'll be processed by the International Criminal Court. And so there is a legal, kind of connection that they're trying to, establish from the information that we have from the Palestinian Americans we know here who've had loved ones killed, to eventually get to the International Criminal Court. Of course, you never know of how far that will go, and but the International Criminal Court of Justice, led by South Africa, has been, obviously progressed to have a judgment where Israel has been found to has been plausibly have committed genocide, but that qualification of plausibly is just a legal process because it'll take years to actually definitively say there's genocide. So this is like a sort of like a temporary injunction in which they say plausibly Israel has been found to be committed genocide.
And South Africa is an interesting country to be taking the lead on this, because I've thought for actually a few decades that to end the apartheid in Israel, and people, a lot of Americans don't really get that it is an apartheid country, and then you show them a map of the roads and how, if you have the wrong license plate number, you can't drive a lot of places.
Yeah.
It's like, what else do you call it? But, South Africa evolved and became a post-apartheid country that remained a single country that became more democratic for all. And I've thought for a long time that that's a model that could be used there in Palestine.
Yeah. It's the dreaded one-state solution, but dreaded only by those who really cling to the current apartheid state. And yes, many people who have actually visited Israel, especially in Hebron, it becomes very obvious that the apartheid nature of the state of Israel, because there are Jewish roads and then there's Arab roads, and so this very clear demarcation of who gets what and who gets the better of what of the land and the water. It's very obvious, and it's only here in the United States that we kind of like we in a general sense, not us individually, but we avoid the reality of Israel being an apartheid state, and it's also it also applies to the Israel proper and the 1948 to 67 areas of Israel where the Palestinians who actually remained have a second-class citizenship, and we in the United States understand especially in the Jim Crow era of people being beneath the law and under the law, especially with regard to race, and so it's so the parallels with South African apartheid and our own history of civil rights around race are couldn't be clearer.
And when we lived in Israel, it was a very different situation because it was in some ways, I don't know what was happening in Gaza. I never did go there, but with the West Bank, for example, there wasn't a wall. You just could drive from, what was considered Israel to what was considered occupied territory. Mm-hmm. There weren't any checkpoints, and you kind of did get a sense of what a single state might look like. Mm-hmm. And then about 20 years ago, Jeff Halper from Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions mm-hmm. did a tour and spoke in Connecticut a few times, mm-hmm. and he was taught, and I asked him, it was in about 2003 or 4, I said, well, what does the impact of building the separation wall have on the two-state, potential two-state solution? And he said it killed it. Mm-hmm. So even if it might have at one time worked, I don't know that it ever really would have
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
But once the separation wall was used in such a way as to encroach upon
Yeah.
Palestinian territory,
Yeah.
it just became,
Yeah. Yeah.
its
Yeah.
own
Many,
part of the problem.
yeah, many people don't understand the brutal nature of occupation and what that means. I mean, we throw that term around, but if you actually live there and see it, you could see how towns with Palestinians are basically enclosed, not only with the wall but other military checkpoints. As you say, it becomes difficult to even travel to 15 minutes between whether Jerusalem and Hebron and I don't know the geography 100%, but between cities, it's just that you would think it was just like normal everyday life in here in the United States. It becomes virtually impossible for the Palestinians living under military occupation. And yeah.
And could you imagine what would happen here in the U.S. if, like, okay, white American citizens, we get, I don't know, yellow plates and we can drive on I-95, but like if you're an immigrant, you have to take Route 1
or the service roads, yes.
I mean, it really is kind of like that you can be going someplace that's 20 kilometers away and it can take you 2 hours because of the roads denying direct access.
Yeah. Or in Gaza, it's even worse that you couldn't get medical treatment. There's like a huge, whether in Egypt or in Israel, like if you're dying, suffering cancer, most people are out of luck, but there are a few that are able to, go for treatment outside of Gaza. But often you have to have a connection with, some, really impressive Israeli people who actually, try to basically allow Palestinians to exit from Gaza for things like cancer treatment and things like that. And so there's this human-to-human connection that some Israelis actually do take the effort to establish to save lives.
And there have all throughout the last 75, 80 years been collaborative efforts and the separation, the wall and other kinds of separation
Fences,
have really been problematic. I heard that, Jewish shopkeepers in Jerusalem used to be able to hire Palestinians who lived in East Jerusalem to work in their stores, and you can't get here from there.
Yeah.
So one of the latest developments in the strife there it's the recent involvement with Iran. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes. My understanding of the situation in Iran is informed a great deal by some well-informed people on the web, namely Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson, and videos that you could see on YouTube very, very easily. Because the media is as we've learned, it's always very propagandistic, and it's actually trying to drive towards some particular goal of trying to influence either U.S. population or Israeli population to make you think that everything's okay. But in terms of actual results from the current strike in Iran, first it should be noted that the most proximate actions were precipitated by an Israeli action to bomb the consulate or embassy in Damascus, Syria. And that bombing, so every embassy across the world is technically the physical land and or sovereign soil of the embassy's country. So theoretically, that is a piece of Iran in Damascus that was attacked by Israel. And of course, the impetus to attack Iran at that embassy in Damascus was most likely because of the failures in Gaza, in that the war cabinet, they understand that there's a failure in the military failure in Gaza, and that they have to expand the war, particularly in Lebanon and in Iran, which will involve and bring in help from the United States. And so that tactic of going, and attacking Iran, was motivated by this this wish to escalate the war and involve the United States, and it seems to have been effective to some degree. So after that bombing that killed several, Iranian generals who were at that embassy at that time, then the question became, what is the retaliation or reaction by the Iranian government? And so for many years, they practiced what they call strategic patience. So they would because there was many assassinations and even a few bombings here and there of Iranian scientists and drone factories and things like that. But they, for the most part, did not, react or attack Israel. But they probably decided to actually not practice that strategic patience and actually retaliate this time, because first probably they were already they were well prepared militarily, and that they have thousands of missiles, and so my understanding is that they decided to retaliate with about 300 missiles and drones, and my understanding is that there was kind of like 3 waves of missiles and drones. First drones, then cruise missiles, and then the best of their missiles, ballistic missiles, and of course this is all analysis that people like Scott Ritter have provided. That final wave actually is kind of like a game changer militarily in the military equation, because those ballistic missiles they have a hypersonic portion to them, or warhead to them, so they can pierce the most well-defended Air Force bases in Israel, and they were able to penetrate those defenses. And so even though they intentionally broadcast that they will attack, what they were trying to do was send a message and not actually cause any serious casualties. But the message is very clear that that the current defenses of Israel are no longer effective. And so it kind of changes the military equation, and that Israel knows now that in a real world test, that they can penetrate their air defenses in their most prized Air Force bases. And
well, I watched part of one of the videos with Scott Ritter, and he was very respectful of the Iranians, both their strategy, and also the fact he was making the assumption that if it came down to a head-to-head conflict, Iran had the edge, which brings us to a very interesting situation. We have a banner behind us which is not strictly related to this. I'm in a local coalition, and since 2021 we have had events in New London commemorating the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entry into force 4 years ago. And Israel, the United States obviously hasn't signed it. Russia hasn't, China hasn't, India hasn't, Iran hasn't, Israel hasn't. And but I think what just happened was both terrifying, because if wars can expand beyond a small region, and really planes, missiles, they can get anywhere in the world. But what do you? I know you would express some maybe optimism that maybe the world will get scared into being rational.
Yeah. So obviously, this interplay between Israel and Iran is quite dangerous, as you say, because Israel does have between 90 and 400 nuclear weapons, and so if Israel thought that. Or actually, some members of the government or in the parliament have threatened nuclear weapons, to use nuclear weapons, and both in Gaza as well as Iran. And so there is the definite realistic or probable possibility that nuclear weapons could be used. But if that ever came to pass, immediately, Russia as an ally to Iran, may employ its nuclear weapons in retaliation, which then in theory, can cause global nuclear war and destroy all civilization. So there is a threat of the death of a human civilization in a World War III in a scenario where the escalatory ladder becomes uncontrolled and
we
blows
end
up
up with mutually assured destruction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's why there's such strong effort by the United States to kind of to limit and also some care by Iran in that they actually forecast to the United States through some intermediaries, I think maybe Turkey or Oman, I don't know which one, that they were going to fire these missiles, and that so they know beforehand. And that's why actually the United States and its ships and around Israel and in other countries like Jordan and maybe intelligence, Saudi Arabia and UAE, they assisted and actually took out the majority of the 300 missiles from Iran, but some of which actually did pass through into Israel. And so the issue of nuclear weapons becomes extremely important because there is the threat of the ending of all human civilization in this current war and the interplay between Israel, Iran, and Russia. So Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and that's been confirmed by international organizations. But they do have the possible threat to get nuclear weapons, in that they're called a nuclear threshold state. In that, with some effort and enrichment of especially the uranium, they could probably produce enough material that could make a bomb. But by their religious leader, there's a fatwa that prohibits the use of nuclear weapons. Because it comes through the prohibition of use of fire in war. Islamically, you're not permitted to use fire to kill your opponents at war, and so the result of nuclear explosion is extreme fires, and so that by that logic, there's a fatwa that prohibits the use of nuclear weapons, and that is the underlying philosophy behind the prohibition of nuclear weapons by Iran. But that does not prohibit the threat or the becoming a threshold nuclear power, and actually that it's an interesting idea because Iran, while they did pursue nuclear program for research and perhaps to have this threat, the most of their efforts which gave them the edge is actually on their missile technologies, and so the Western pursuit to prevent the nuclearization of Iran, was a distraction for their real efforts to gain their strategic superiority, which is through the missile program. But to follow up on your point, I think because of the threat of global thermonuclear war, it becomes imperative that we denuclearize the world, and we can, because of this is the current threat. I think the anti-nuclear movement would benefit a great deal by focusing on denuclearizing the Middle East, namely Israel, and Iran, even its threshold nuclear status, and to prevent other states that are kind of interested in nuclear weapons, like Saudi Arabia, to prevent them from ever even getting close to getting nuclear weapons. But it has to, obviously, because of the current war, it has to be mutually pursued to denuclearize both Israel as well as all the states around it, Iran being the biggest one. And that process of a peace movement that to denuclearize Israel and to some degree Iran can be hopefully a stepping stone that can denuclearize the world, let's say to denuclearize or reduce the tensions between India and Pakistan. And then once if that has made progress, you can then address the nuclear weapons of China, which then will obviously then involve the denuclearization of the United States and Russia, and put the nuclear genie back into the bottle, and end this kind of sword of Damocles over all human civilization, that we could all die within 26 minutes from a launch of a nuclear weapon.
You know, back in January, we had one of these shows prior to the January event, and one of the participants pointed out, you know, we always think of nuclear, you know, explosions as being the mushroom cloud, but honestly, that's the look from the outside of it, not the look from the inside of it. But if it dropped, like the city of New London would be gone.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't see a mushroom cloud.
Yeah.
And so I think Americans very often just see things happening in other places and feel very far removed from those things. But I don't know, the way transportation is these days, no one's really far removed from anything.
So I was very privileged to work with the late Dr. Victor Seidel, and he was the past president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and that group, you know, as a group, not him as an individual, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985 because they had thousands of U.S. physicians and even more Soviet at that time physicians who advocated for the prevention of nuclear war, and they've done a lot of work on a kind of like the effects of nuclear explosions on the human population, and obviously in kind of like three different levels. Obviously, the first destruction is the actual near the ground zero is this complete vaporization because of the extreme heat and energy that is released by the nuclear explosion. But then, of course, there's kind of concentric rings, and those people who are a little bit farther removed, you know, many of them, even if they survive, you know, they die within like 30 days of radiation sickness. And even people, you know, a little bit closer will have extreme burns that will kill them within days, just because of the sheer heat and energy that will affect their skin and flesh. But then, you know, a little bit out farther from that is the radiation sickness patients. But then, of course, especially with multiple nuclear explosions, what occurs is that the heat and energy will cause fires, you know, across the world. That you know, and these fires will, and as well as the nuclear explosions themselves, will cause extreme amounts of tons and tons of dust and carbon will fill the atmosphere, and it will block the sun. And then, so there'll be basically a global ice age, which will then cause, obviously, all agriculture and crops to die from the lack of sun and the cold temperature. And this describes nuclear winter. And so, basically, the final coup de grace of the human population and civilizations will cease to exist is through the very long-term process of starvation, because crops and agriculture will fail. You know, whether anyone or just a few stragglers here and there will survive is a big question. So even if you survive and there's only a few you know, nuclear explosions, you know, the long-term process of the nuclear winter will basically finish off human population, and the starvation is probably a much harsher you know, death than the instantaneous vaporization from the nuclear explosions.
Yeah. Ooh, it all sounds pretty awful.
Yeah.
I know that we see a lot of generational variation in how Americans are responding to this. Young people seem very concerned, very sympathetic with Palestine. Older people, like my age mates, it's like it's hit or miss whether I want to start talking to them or not, because you know, I don't know. There's a real change in the shift in opinion by age group more than anything else, and Zionism just is not something that's very respected or empathized with by most young people.
Yeah.
So what's happening on here, as you know, news is getting out about what's really happening, even though the U.S. media continues to be very biased
Yeah.
and omits a whole lot. We have the internet. We have other channels of real news. Al Jazeera, even Haaretz has a bias, but it's much more complete than what than what you see in the Times or the Post.
Yeah, it's very surprising that actually there's a lot more freedom of expression and opinion in Israel than there is in actually the United States, and as evidenced by Haaretz, even if it has its own limitations, we'd all benefit if we could have the Haaretz opinion Overton window in the United States, and because there are columnists, Gideon Levy, I think, is one who've openly discussed Israel as being an apartheid state and other issues. And so definitely technology has certainly benefited the youth in terms of being more informed and to see through the different propagandas of the established media, and that's hopeful for the for the future. And in terms of recent actions, obviously it started most notably at Columbia, but these encampments, calling for divestment mostly at Columbia and at the lawn in front of the library and that famous alma mater statue. Kind of started it off, but there's obviously one in Yale.
I saw a list just this afternoon that there are 14 or 15 campuses now, and more coming online. It's kind of like the late 60s, early 70s again. Yeah. And of course, it doesn't do the institutions much credit that they're shutting it down.
Yeah. So what's interesting is the use of the police, because the police actually, in particular of the NYPD and Columbia, it turns out that the Columbia administration was more gun-ho than the NYPD, and the NYPD is notoriously brutal. But they obviously saw that the protesters weren't even blocking civil disobedience, blocking entryway. They were just sitting at one place on the lawn. So who knows that Columbia was so sensitive about their lawn use, and but yes, it's pretty atrocious that they're using right away the force of the state in the form of the police to arrest people and then also suspend students, including the daughter of Representative Ilhan Omar, who's at Columbia, or Barnard, as we speak, there was also arrests. I think was it Monday morning? Yes, I think at Yale as well. I don't know what legal processes or what just general political support should be lent to the students, and especially for those who are arrested. And there was even arrests of NYU faculty, not just the students, but the actual faculty were also arrested because there was also an encampment at NYU.
So the issue of free speech has really come up quite a lot. There was, I think, also a situation where at a West Coast university, the class valedictorian was not allowed to speak because, talking about your Palestinian family is now considered hate speech.
Yes, in the case of the University of Southern California, I think it's her work was actually around, and like her thesis or her academic pursuit was around issues of genocide and human rights, and so they obviously knew right away what she was going to talk about, and so they preemptively shut her down by not allowing her to speak. And so it's been well known that it's pretty in vogue recently for the right to call out quote unquote cancel culture, but it's been known for decades that the real victims of cancel culture, or the most severe victims of cancel culture for many years, has been those who are advocate for Palestinian rights, and so they've suffered academic repercussions like Norman Finkelstein, or there's a famous case in the Chicago area, and many other cases. And so it's kind of hypocritical now that the right wing is, all of a sudden talking about cancel culture when they want to express, right wing racist ideas, but they never make mentions or repair the those who've suffered the cancel culture for being pro-Palestinian.
And you're mentioning Norman Finkelstein. Yeah. A lot of Jewish Voice for Peace people. There are several Jewish organizations, Tikkun Olam, Jews Against Genocide, and it seems as though some of the Jewish people who are, I don't know, traitors to our identity, I'm not sure, get treated more harshly than others.
Yes.
And I can't help, I learned recently that for every Jewish Zionist in the U.S., there are like 20 Christian Zionists.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that a lot of those Christian Zionists are actually anti-Semitic.
Yes, yeah.
It isn't, they're not pro-Israel because they care about the well-being of Jews.
Yeah.
And Israelis actually, this is horrible for working class Israelis. Can you imagine, the people with families going for a 2-month tour of reserve duty in Gaza and then coming home to their family? And Israelis and Palestinians don't look very different from each other. Apartheid South Africa might have been clearer, but there are a lot of Sephardic Jews. They really don't look that different. And I just wonder how these broken people will come back and deal with their families.
Yes. As you mentioned, the current war is causing economic hardship, being away for military duty, but also, of course, those who are actually killed and injured of the Israeli soldiers. And there's even reports of a lot of psychiatric repercussions for being part of war. Obviously, we in the United States are familiar with PTSD,
right.
But there's similar situations and suicides of Israeli reservists or military officers, and
and one thing I learned from Haaretz back in January, there was an exodus of psychiatrists from Israel to the UK because the finance department wouldn't fund public mental health. So I don't know how many psychiatrists it was. I think it was a few dozen psychiatrists just up and left. So you have, we have a lot of untreated mental health crises. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that are going to be going on here for anyone who wants to get involved. But maybe before we talk about events, find out, tell people how they can get in touch with your organization.
Yes. So we're blessed to have a very nice, simple website. It's PalestineCT.com. So Palestine, like the country, and then CT.com, and so it's a simple website. It's not very sophisticated, but it's a place where you can sign up to be on our email list and endorse or volunteer. Or the highest level of involvement is what we call the working group, and so you have to request, and we kind of ask you questions about your interests and abilities and a little bit about yourself. And but also at that website we have a Palestine voter pledge, and so the idea is to create a statistical database that will enable us to interact with the elected officials in a more that we're better prepared to say that we understand this statistical sample of the voting population that is this strongly motivated about Palestine. And so if you don't actually produce results for Palestine, we know that there's a large group of people, representative sample, that will probably vote against you, or if you do act for Palestine, they may vote for you.
So we have a couple of slides. There are some events coming up. The one that's coming up soonest on Sunday, the 28th, there's a march in New Haven. We have a slide meet at the New Haven Green, I think, at noon. And there are, I don't know, a long group of sponsors of that particular march. And maybe we can show the picture. I think it's called March. Yes, March for a Free Palestine, Sunday the 28th at noon, meeting at New Haven Town Green. And I suspect it will be a big crowd. I looked at the endorsing organization list, and it looked like at least two dozen organizations. And then on May 3rd at the Palestine Museum in Woodbridge, there is it's in person and also a webinar, and I don't remember exactly what it's called, the Joy is Resistance.
Yes.
And it seemed like a very interesting panel discussion with people from all different backgrounds. I see Shelley Altman from Jewish Voice for Peace in there. And that also seems like it could be really worthwhile. The panel can be viewed online, but it's actually worth going to visit the Palestine Museum if you've never been there.
Yeah. My mom lives in Bethany, which is just the town north of Woodbridge, so we pass the Palestine Museum quite a bit. So yeah.
Yeah, I've never had a tour there, but I've been at events there. Mazin Kumsia from the Palestine Sustainability Institute in Bethlehem.
I'm proud to say that he's actually a formal endorser of the Connecticut Palestine Alliance. So Mazin, at Bethlehem, in occupied Bethlehem, over the internet, he formally endorsed the Connecticut Palestine Alliance.
Oh, that's fantastic. He was on this TV show back in fall of 2004 when we first started. He was going around the country on this Wheels of Justice tour. So he's been back in Bethlehem for quite a while. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I see we only have 3 minutes left, is the Peace Walk. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the Peace Walk.
Actually, I actually am more familiar with something that's still in the works. It's called the Walk for Gaza. And so it's a little bit different because, but this is very good too as well. This to my knowledge is actually focused on military issues, especially because it's put together by the Veterans for Peace, at least in part.
Right, and I think they're walking from Maine down to D.C., but they will be in Connecticut for about 2 weeks, from end of May into the first couple days in June. They will be in New London for the Coast Guard Academy graduation.
Okay.
So there will be something there. I think I heard that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, was going to be speaking this year. So I expect quite a bit. There will be some demonstrations at Electric Boat in both Groton and in New London. So more to come on that. And tell me about the Walk for Gaza.
Okay, so the Walk for Gaza is actually around Memorial Day weekend, and the idea is to actually have the walk to be in total about 25 miles, which is the length of the Gaza Strip, and they've kind of divided it into three sections. There'll be a Thursday, the 23rd of May, is in New Haven, and it'll be from New Haven Green and include a kind of demonstration outside of Representative DeLauro's offices, congressional offices. The second part will be in Bridgeport, and it will start at the Bridgeport Islamic Community Center, and at around 1 o'clock, where there's Friday prayers, but then it will go on to Representative Jim Himes's congressional office, and maybe end up at the Seaside Park, the beach in Bridgeport. And then the third day is actually probably the main event, is the Saturday, the 25th of May, and that will be along the more scenic route along the coast, along the ocean, between maybe Guilford and Hammonasset Park. And so it's actually still in the works, and so we're not 100% ready to announce everything, and so I may have pushed the envelope a little bit in even mentioning this, but that's kind of where it's kind of solidifying,
Well, you have a website,
PalestineCT.com.
Yes. And so I imagine as information is available.
Especially if you sign up for the email list. Yes.
So do you have any last words how people can either get more involved, get better informed, or find solidarity?
Yes. So there's several links on that PalestineCT.com website. We have what we call the Palestine Voter Pledge, as we mentioned, and even I mentioned a long time ago the Connecticut General Assembly letter, and we're having an equivalent one for local elected officials. And so that one is, so we ask that you, if you have an interaction with your local official, like your councilman or mayor, that you share that ceasefire letter, that we encourage them to co-sign. And the link for that is, the short link is bit.ly/PalestineCT. So so you could go there and hopefully share it with your local official and have them co-sign.
And it's a good discussion to have with our local officials, especially since not just, Connecticut's economy is so dependent on the military
Yes.
Industry, and increasingly so, that it's just a good discussion to have as for a healthy city.
Yes. Yes.
So we're out of time.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Omar, for coming down
You're welcome.
to Waterford.
Yes.
And I hope people find your website,
Yes.
get involved, and maybe we'll see some of them at some of these events.
Yes, absolutely.
And hopefully I'll see you at some of the events.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you. And next week, our guests will be Owen Charles and Lynn Charles, who have spent the last year at the border in the Southwest in Arizona and New Mexico, helping immigrants. So we'll see you then.
Great.
And thanks again for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you.